I don't know if that's how Twitter planned it or so, but there you have it. So we put that. Is it doing that? Very good. So I don't know if that's like how it was planned or not. But we were writing that even though Twitter is much criticized, even though everyone goes, oh, these are like crazy tweets, it basically controls, or the person who's giving the controversial tweet is controlling what's being said. Whereas in a soundbite, you can speak for 2 hours and you don't know which 9 seconds are going to be covered. So it may actually revolutionize how future campaigns are done. But I thought it was interesting because as soon as our student research came out, several publications all across the United States started coming up with their own version of what we had, whereas nobody really covered this since 1992. So I still have to go back and see if anybody cited our students, but it was great to get their names in publication. We have presentations due. Is that right? I saw a number of people getting those on in. That's very good. So I know I have 1 or 2 people with questions still. You may ask those after class. In which case, why not we stop like around 9:25? Okay, so who do I have who was able to go? Because I saw a number of you there, but who else do we have? Who was able to make it? I know Jacob won. Oh, Jacob. 2 of the 3 Jacobs. Jacob, when you were there? Probably late notice. I know Brandon was there. Did I have somebody else? Anybody else who was there yesterday? No. Well, we had 1 or 2. Speaking of myths, anybody ever see this, the elf on the shelf sort of thing? See, that is not something I grew up with, so, you know, going off to college when this sort of phenomenon came out, so I didn't quite see it or so, but we had this sort of thing, and my wife's like, oh, we got to figure out how to like re-gift this or give this to somebody else as a short notice present. I said, no, not for right now. I need this character in here. It's going to watch over all of you, so you're not like on Facebook, and you're not on like, you know, some other website. You're not like looking at travel.com and planning your trip. So this guy's watching you. And if that's not enough, I have a tie that plays Christmas music. So that doesn't get you in the festive mood. I don't know. So, oh, it's a lot lighter than it must be the open air room. Normally a lot quieter. Oh, you should see the flashing light tie. I know where that was from. So, don't forget to follow on America, the Story of Us. So if you have that break for Friday, if you didn't get a chance to watch them over break, make sure that you do. That's where people stumble the most on questions. Tonight or tomorrow, I should be able to have the final exam written up, which means that by Monday, I'll be able to give you an in-class exam, practice exam, and that way you can see how well you're doing and what you need to work on. Exam day itself, let us clarify. For my schedule, I have your exam day set for Thursday morning. Sound good? I got a question. Do you all prefer to get the practice exam Friday, the week before, or will Monday do? Your choice.
Monday's fine.
Monday's fine?
Okay. You said the final is Thursday?
Final is Thursday of next week. Don't worry about this week. So Thursday, and it's 8 to 11 for whatever time you need, and they'll be here. So, I mean, unless like, you know, like a tornado hits us or something, in which case I'll have to do it. So, okay, very good. So make sure that you're keeping up with that. And I will refer back to both America, the Story of Us sections. We've got one more, and that's for this Friday, is Millennium. So because we haven't got to that yet in American Experience, I won't go over that. I thought you might find this interesting. This is the first time I've used this statistic. We're looking at two things. We're going to look at family life, and we're going to look at the economy of the 1950s. And this, again, this is not like a slight, a pro or a con against anything about Donald Trump, but when you hear the phrase, make America great again, everyone's like, well, what do you mean we're not great right now? Or what time period are you referring to for make America great? And typically is cited as the 1950s, which history will call America's golden age. So typically when we look at, when people ask polls, typically the 1950s are considered when people think that is a time where America was great. So we're going to look at that today. And don't think that just if I find there's evidence saying the 1950s are great or are not so great, that this means Donald Trump is good or bad. This is not meant to be a political discussion. I've been doing this review since George W. Bush was president, so I've continued it through the Barack Obama administration. It's not meant to be, you know, I didn't just whip this up like, oh my gosh, the election happened, how do I discredit the president-elect? No, it's not the focus of it. But I did, there are two ways that you can think about when doing analysis on American experience or American history. There's cross-sectional, and then there's a longitudinal. I really wish that they would call it latitudinal. But one way that you can say, well, as compared to what? Here's what America is doing, as compared to what? So you can look at two things. One, you can look at America past to present, and you can also look at America compared to other countries. So that's what we're going to look at today. So when you're doing your analysis, no matter what your major is, whether it's biology, whether it's theater, whether it's sociology, whether it's religion, English, these are ideas when you're looking, you know, always think about comparing. As compared to what is a key element. So de Tocqueville, even back in the 1830s, said that American family life is very different from the family life of other places. Even yesterday, a couple faculty and staff were talking about this, and we had Todd Prater was talking about a special that he showed for his class in counseling about transgender bathrooms. And he said that in many other countries, they don't identify which gender in the bathroom is, so they couldn't understand what our controversy was. And to some extent, though, it depends on which country you go to. But like, you know, there's a few places, like if you go to rural Turkey or something like that, they'll identify male and female bathroom. But in the bigger cities, I mean, you know, just there's a bathroom. And I remember my wife and the other guys, I warned my wife about this, but she said that when you went to the bathrooms, you know, they're not distinguished by men versus women, but whether they have a toilet or whether there's a hole. And I remember she was like, oh, it's not going to be like that. And she was like, you're right. But, you know, again, you wouldn't know unless you had some comparison to make across cultures or how things used to be versus how they are today. It'd be interesting to see if we actually had men and women's bathrooms, like how far back that went or so in American society. And just something interesting. I figure since that's a big controversy, especially up in North Carolina. About the family unit. This is some data that I unearthed, and it's comparing the U.S., Canada, and Great Britain. How often, how many nights a week out of 7 days does your family eat dinner together at home? Comparing 3 Anglo-American countries. Common roots in some cases. You know, though if you ever go to Great Britain and if you go to Canada, you know, maybe not quite as diverse as the United States, but more than most people think they are. What do you notice? Anything interesting jump out at you? Or just, move along, nothing to see? Can you all see it? That's where I need more people in the front row. Anything? You don't get a lower grade if you say something I go, wrong! No, but what do you see?
It looks like 4 out of 6 days Americans eat together.
Okay. It's still a pretty good percentage. Yeah, obviously it depends on the family. You'll notice that other countries, Canada and Great Britain, I mean, have a higher rate of having the family meal for dinner, everyone being there together. Whereas only about 1 in 4 families have that as a tradition in the United States. I just thought you might find that interesting. Because America is seen as very much like, oh, the family unit is like a big deal. Cohesive, traditional family unit. Yeah, you can also say Americans are. Why might we have a lower number of 7 days a week family meal together? Yeah, a lot of it's America's seen as pretty much a country on the go, always working, and so you fit family in rather than work is fit around family, families fit in around work to some extent. Yeah, not saying family isn't important. It's just which becomes the dominant element. Just like some students, they fit everything around study and school, and others it's like, okay, fit around social life. It depends. Hey, I was a college student too. I understand it completely. How many of y'all have ever seen, you ever watched television shows from the 1950s? And you're like, I went around the 1950s. Oh, so a couple of you have. How do you get to watch these things? TV Land, isn't it great too? We didn't have TV Land. But I worked for a Fox TV station, and we would show a lot of old 1950s shows whenever we didn't have Fox programming or movies to show. So, which ones had you seen?
I Love Lucy.
I Dream of Jeannie.
I Dream of Jeannie. Really? So a lot of you have. 50s has some sway. Have we seen Bewitched? Anybody ever seen a show called Father Knows? Anybody ever seen a show called Father Knows Best? That's one that's cited according to the editors when they showed or when they were talking about television shows. And it's not so much, or anybody ever seen, can you think of any other famous 1950s shows even if you've never seen it? Ooh, that's right, those teams have more southern sway. Incidentally, I remember watching a holiday special of the Andy Griffith Show not long ago, and the town, what is it? Mayberry. They had a big banner draped out for Christmas. You want to know what it said? Season's greetings. Which is funny because that's like, people are saying, oh, if you say season's greetings, that means you're anti-Christian. That means you're not saying Merry Christmas. You're trying to be too politically correct. Well, I guess that's what they were thinking in Mayberry back then. It was just a common phrase, season's greetings. Go ahead, Jacob.
Gunsmoke?
Gunsmoke! Oh darn, I thought you were going to. Yeah, that's like one of the longest running television shows like in history. Westerns were really big. In fact, when a lot of other countries, that's how they perceive America, through Westerns, because we produce so many Westerns. But if you think about it, Hollywood is pretty, kind of out in the desert, so if you want to shoot some stuff, Westerns were pretty easy. I remember arguments that, like, the reason no pope had ever visited the United States until Pope Paul VI, and he became pope in like the late 60s. He was pope throughout the 70s. It wasn't until the 80s that a pope, and all he did is he just went, spoke at the UN, and just left as soon as he could. And one of the arguments was, with all the Westerns, people just thought of America as a big Wild West kind of country. How safe could you be? But if you think about it, when you're like, oh, here's something from America, and it's a Western. That's how you think of Americans. But, and, I kind of miss, in American experience, they used to have a whole section devoted to the West, and given that I was raised out there, oh, I miss that section. Being able to talk about America's role in there, talking about the gun culture, talking about sort of, you know, so the cowboy myth and stuff like that. You know, again, not a false or true thing, but how it still plays a role in not just our social lives, but our politics as well. So anybody ever seen a show called Father Knows Best? Anybody want to see part of the clip? All right, let's see if I can get it to work. Some years it does, some years it doesn't. That's another thing we can, oh, that's right, that's right. Don't worry folks, this is a two-part. Okay, see if I can get it. That's the other great thing. In addition to TV Land, bless us for having YouTube, so you can watch. Well, let's try one. Like I said, that's one of the problems with YouTube, right? It's kind of like whack-a-mole. You can have something up, play it for a while, and then they'll say, oh, you know, need content license, so they knock it down and just has to morph somewhere else. But yeah, if you get the chance, go ahead and watch to see if you can watch a clip of Father Knows Best. We'll kick that ahead to Monday of next week. You don't have to watch out, you know, a whole episode. These were like half-hour episodes. But I think you might find it interesting because if you read the section from Colombo et al. About harmony in the home, over and over again, Father Knows Best is cited as an example of a patriarchal society. I know what patriarchy is, or patriarchal society. I know Tony knows. Anybody else other than Tony knows? You better know, because I just put you on the spot. What is a patriarchy?
It's where the man is in charge, kind of like a father figure.
Okay, yeah, there's head of household is a man. It's a traditional society, man, wife, kids. And in this case, the two kids are teenagers. It was probably about as popular as Leave It to Beaver, another classic 1950s show. But I want you to watch Father Knows Best because it might throw a curve at you. Let me know what you think. It's too bad because this episode is really funny as hell. See the one where the daughter's dating. French guy. Oh yeah, watch it. Okay, but we'll move on ahead to Stephanie Coontz. Remember, one of several articles you've got to know for the exam, so make sure your notes on this are pretty good. Stephanie Coontz is a major figure in terms of writing about the United States, about family structure, about the way life was. Had a big book that talked about sort of how we used to be. A couple of years ago, she had a big speech at Emory University or so during the time I was teaching an American Experience class. I couldn't convince any American Experience students to go on a field trip. I guess the political science students are easier to convince to just hop into a car and drive off to see such an event. But just to let you know that, you know, it's a pretty popular person. I think I got a YouTube of her appearing on The Daily Show or so. So she's an academic that gets called into a number of different TV shows to talk about, you know, how we were, or the way things were. So according to Stephanie Coontz, what's good about the 1950s? What do you know about the 1950s? Do we have anybody, obviously not living in the 50s? Do you have family talk about it, relatives? Have you seen it portrayed on television shows, what the 1950s are like?
It's just kind of like everybody had this like image of like the ideal family. Like you lived in the suburbs, you had your family, you were middle class, you had 2 kids and a car, and like you're just.
That's kind of what was going on in America, the story of a superpower, which is why I was showing it to you. And it's different for me because I was born in 1970, and so of course, you know, people would talk about, oh, this is what it was like in the 1950s. Now you got to stretch it to grandparents or great-grandparents or so. But for us, we were always, you know, people bapped us over the head like, this is the way things were. You know, and seen as like, you know, as you mentioned, the suburban life. It's the good life. An optimistic time. why suburbia? They mentioned a couple other things about the 1950s. Why do we have such an optimistic view of the 1950s?
Like divorce rates went down and then birth rate went up.
Okay.
Poverty was going down.
It's not like
Okay, let's take all these. Divorce rate going down, birth rate going up, poverty decline. Go ahead, Samuel. It's fine. Tell us the 1950s, man. No, go ahead. What was it?
wasn't it right after the baby boom?
Yeah, okay, it's after the baby boom. What fuels this like birth of suburbia? Remember they had certain.
Everybody's coming home after World War II.
Okay, post World War II. You mentioned poverty rate down, so therefore, what do we assume about the economy?
Jobs here.
Jobs plentiful. You can move out to the suburbs. Remember, what was a big status symbol back then?
Car.
Okay, that's one of the status symbols was a car. Yeah, the fact that we would also have 2 cars. You know, far more than, I mean, yeah, sure, you had Model Ts and, you know, Chevy sedans and stuff in the 1920s, but this is, you know, this is where it gets really big. You've got a car boom. This is where Detroit becomes like one of the most powerful cities. Don't laugh. That's where my mom's from, by the way, from Detroit. Now, anybody can go, oh, Detroit, what a wasteland, you know, or something. That's where she was born and raised. You know, Flint, Michigan, you know, we're talking about all the poison water that was given over there. But Flint, Michigan was where a lot of the auto plants were. So Flint, Michigan was a, you know, was a powerhouse. Just kind of goes to show you, you know, times can come and go just as different elements come in. So, an optimistic time economically, a good time for family, correct? That's what we know about the 1950s. Anybody ever seen the 1950s in popular culture? Not just 1950s television shows. What else? Yeah, Gunsmoke is obviously set not during the 50s. It came out in the 50s, but it's like set in the 1800s. Have you ever seen anything where the 1950s is portrayed in television or in movies? Nobody?
What do you mean?
Well, like, you're like a TV show that's set in the 1950s, that's like released today. Like how people today view the 1950s.
I remember like in the movie Major Payne, he's having like
Have you ever seen it?
he's imagining something and it's like the white picket fence family. Like,
And it's set in like the 1950s?
Yeah, they're out like in the yard grilling, like hanging out, you know, behind the white picket fence, and they've got their pretty house and all that, and it's like.
Okay, I didn't see that. Is that the one with Damon Wayans?
Yeah.
Okay, I have to see that.
The ROTC.
And they've got like a myth of the 1950s. Anybody ever seen Mad Men? None of y'all? It's Mad Men standing for like Mad as in Madison Avenue, not like, oh, they're crazy. Never heard of Mad Men?
I heard of it.
You gotta watch that. I mean, it's produced by a LaGrange College graduate. I mean, it's won a stack of Emmys and it's like one of the most successful TV shows of this decade. Did y'all know that? Yeah, one of the producers. I actually one time I was like driving home and yeah, he was interviewed on NPR and I'm like, I've heard that name before. That's right, he graduated from LaGrange College. You didn't know about that? Oh, you gotta watch the show now. At least binge watch it over. Not now. Don't binge watch anything during the finals. Binge watch like the nanosecond finals are done. Like as you're walking out, you'd start with episode 1. But it's set in the 1950s. You know, and it's obviously not like Leave It to Beaver. It's you know, it's got some racy elements. It describes how the workplace was. It describes. Well, we'll get back to Family Mad Men in a little bit. Anybody ever seen the movie Back to the Future? Somebody had to have seen it. Raise your hand if you've seen it. Go ahead, a little higher. Well, are you embarrassed? Y'all like alligator arming it. Come on, let's see. Okay, about half the class has seen it. What have we learned about Back to the Future in that movie? Who's seen that? How is the 1950s portrayed? Y'all ever seen it? I always think like you know, when he goes back, I mean he's kind of, you know, when the movie starts off, it's kind of a darker time. Things don't look as well. You wonder if it was set in Michigan. And then all of a sudden he goes back in time and everything is just perfect and the town square looks nice. Do you ever see that? Somebody pulls up to a gas station and it's like a NASCAR pit crew of people like wearing all white uniforms and hats come running out. They're working on every element of the car. And Michael J. Fox is like, because that's when self-serve began. Like people are coming up, they're cleaning the windshield, they're checking under the hood, they're replacing the oil. It really looks like a NASCAR pit crew. Yeah, everything just seems spotless and perfect. You ever seen that? The 1980s, everything seemed very dull. And it's a dystopia. You know what a dystopia is, right? What's a dystopia?
It's like, looking on pretty much society was like.
Okay. Things are very imperfect during that time. The opposite of a utopia, let's say. So when you're at one of those holiday parties and stuff like that, where you got like the meatballs that you get to dip in spicy barbecue sauce, and you're all wearing fancy clothes, just you throw in that word dystopia, you know, just to show everybody you got the creds to be a college. I think this is a rather dystopic. Doesn't that sound good? But yeah, 50s are seen as very optimistic time. Anything problematic about the 1950s that Stephanie Coontz talks about? And she agrees, economy's roaring. Families stay together. Anything dystopic about the 50s, according to Stephanie Coontz?
She says that there was oppression of like other ethnic and racial groups.
Okay. So now it's kind of a stuffy decade in terms of social progress. Okay, we've heard that one before. Anything else? Make things less than perfect?
You know, like in the household.
Yeah, go ahead. What do we know about marriages during that time? About the family structure?
Women stayed home.
Okay. Yeah, there's a stay home, and then there's a, and then you go, you know, some people go in to dance, some people stay at home. I was giving a presentation to our Bible study class, and we had a lot of people who like lived during this time. And this person said, yeah, he said, my mom was a stay-at-home mom. She really was. We only have one car.
Yesterday, who spoke said his mom was a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah. That's right. He was also saying that to the congressman who came up, Lynn Westmoreland. So given that he's ready to retire in his 70s, I guess he probably went through some element of that. Quality of marriage, good, bad, eh. What's the famous meh? My daughter emailed that back and said, hey, what do you think about doing this? Meh. I took that as neither good nor bad. It's like a null hypothesis. Do we know?
What do you know? Well, divorce rates were down. I mean, like, people had problems, they just kind of don't really work through it, just kind of like live through it.
You have to kind of live through it, tough it out. But that's just what everyone else was doing, right? So we know about the myths. So make sure that you understand that this is what Stephanie Coontz is arguing, okay? Now you draw something in your notes. I don't know how the hell you do it if you take notes on phone, but you know, since writing down helps you remember stuff better than typing it up. Well, I guess typing it, you can do this. Draw like a figurative barbed wire, where you can a bunch of dashes across. Because this confuses people. Yeah, Stephanie Coontz has set the table for the 1950s myth, the pros and cons. All right. Let's take a closer look. So this is what's not Stephanie Coontz. By the way, when we talk about social progress, I thought you might find this interesting. A little bit of a pop culture reference. Anybody here play video games? A couple of y'all did? Half the class, looks like. You're alligator arming it again. Yeah, seriously, kind of. Let me see. If you can't guess, I don't know what this means. Okay. I thought you might find this interesting. Back in the day, believe it or not, in the 1950s, one of the big things they felt like was responsible for crime back during this time, when people were concerned about crime during the 1950s. There was actually a senator, Tennessee Senator Estes Kefauver. He had televised hearings about organized crime. So this is how everyone learned about the mafia. Well, I mean, the inner cities, you knew that there was a mafia, but this is how it was televised. I know the first television broadcast was 1936, but the 1950s, this is where TVs are everywhere. Right after cars, that's the next big status symbol, right? The TV. You see Back to the Future?
Yeah, he puts wheels on the TV set.
Yeah, they just wheel in the first TV set and they're all excited about watching the television. A big deal. They also had congressional hearings. This is before we had C-SPAN. Like, people would actually watch this. Mostly, I think, because of the novelty of television. But they also had a series of public hearings about how comic books. Anybody here a comic book reader? I didn't read comic books much. How many of you have ever seen a movie based on a comic book? Like these Marvel movies, DC? Okay, this is the biggest nods of the day. I guess if I said how many of you own a car, that's the only thing that could beat it. It would be watching a comic book movie. Believe it or not, comic books came this close to being banned in America. This close. Psychologists pretty much went across the country, appeared before Congress, and he did his research, which showed that, he said he worked with prisoners. He would go to prisons, and just about all the prisoners would read would be comic books. So he concluded, therefore, that comic books, were leading people to crime. You're shaking your head, Tony. Sounds like you're not buying this sophisticated research design.
It just sounds a bit crazy.
Yeah.
Why does it sound crazy?
Maybe all they had was comic books. I mean,
What?
maybe all they had was comic books. Maybe if all they had was Home Living magazine,
Yeah.
then that wouldn't always be better.
Whatever, because you ever see prison movies, or not saying you've been to prison, but I mean, you ever seen prison movies where people are wheeling through a cart, what are you going to read? And it's a lot of, hand-me-down kind of things, and comic books in it. Go ahead, Tony, you got a point.
Also, going back to comparison, what is he comparing his research to? I know he's going to prisons, but what is he also basing it on?
Oh, we're picking up today's point. Yeah, exactly, as compared to what? Well, I suppose they weren't pulling out War and Peace by Tolstoy, It's seen as the industry standard for a really long book.
Well, probably most of the people in jail too aren't the best readers in the world, and probably would like some of that as pictures in. Comic
Yeah.
book is about 90%.
It's easier to set context if you don't know how to read than if you're just looking at words. Images can kind of fill in some of the blanks. Hey, for some people that may be that's how you figure out things. Just like we had a South Korean family when I was in grad school. They would go to English classes in the morning, the guy and his wife, but afterwards they said it was really hard to learn English, especially if you're in your 30s and 40s. It's hard to pick up a brand new language. And their English got dramatically better. And I remember they had us over for dinner. We're like, your English is doing awesome. And those English classes are really helping out now. And they shook their head and we're like, well, what's helping you? And they're like, Seinfeld.
It's like, whenever I think about them reading comic
They
books,
just watch Seinfeld because, of course, it's visual, So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
whenever I think about them like wanting to read comic books, things like Shawshank Redemption, and they're categorizing the books, and the guy says Count of Monte Cristo by Zedry Damas, Dumas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Nobody's ever brought up Shawshank Redemption yet. Famous prison movie or so. That's how people are read. In fact, they invited us on over because while they picked up their English really well, they couldn't get a lot of the inside jokes, so they had a big dinner for us, and they wrote down all the things. They're like, okay, explain why this is funny. So we had to do that. Anybody ever watch Seinfeld? Jerry Seinfeld made the argument that he doesn't do college campuses anymore because he thinks college students are too thin-skinned to get some of the jokes. I don't know if you think that's true. Because the episode we watched, Kramer fell asleep in a tanning booth, and he was being invited over to an African-American household. He was dating a gal who was black, and of course he shows up like about the darkest tan a human being can have. But it was like meant to be funny, but I was thinking, yeah, I can see where some people are going, you can't do that. But, not to be funny. Believe it or not, this guy pretty much sold a lot of books, appeared on a lot of television shows. Like I said, came this close to having comics banned in America. This is a poll from the 1950s that showed that when they asked, do you think any of the blame for teenage crimes can be placed on the reading of comic books? 70% of people said yes. Anybody have a comic book? Like, you own any? Take a look for something. You'll see a small little image, usually on the right-hand side of the comic book, either at the very top or somewhere halfway down. And it's a member of the Comic Book Association. Like, in other words, the comic books desperately realizing they were going to be banned from this country, raced in and said, whoa, 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 give us one chance, we'll sell police. And you had to follow a 25-step program to be published by the Comic Book Association. Like, every comic book that was produced had to go by this association. I kid you not. And like, all characters, like, you know, who were protagonists had to be good. All antagonists or bad people actually had to be evil. And evil always had to lose. Good always had to win. Government and law enforcement always had to be portrayed as positive. Always. Like in every single situation. So some of the comics that were a little more, you know, violence always had to be portrayed as wrong and always had to be punished, except unless the good person is using violence against a bad person, which often happened. But I kid you not. When you say it's a stuffy decade, that's how it was. And there were a whole bunch of comics that were, you know, kind of like a little edgier, a little darker. You were banned. So don't forget, this is during McCarthy era. A lot of social behaviors came under scrutiny. If you heard about McCarthyism and witch hunts, anyone who'd ever attended a communist meeting, and before you think, well, of course they're communists, we're fighting the Soviet Union. In the 1930s, when we had 1 out of 3 people being unemployed and people wondering if the economy would ever recover, it was a little, you know, it was a little more acceptable to be a communist. But 20 years later, it wasn't, and so careers were ruined if you ever showed up to a meeting 20 years earlier. And pretty much, if you criticized anything about contemporary U.S. government, that made you a communist. Anybody here a video game player? Okay, you can admit it. Again, alligator arm. It's okay, I'm asking not to condemn you, folks. Do we only have 2 video gamers? Okay. Yeah, casual players. Not 7 days a week, but 4 to 6. 4 to 6 days a week, you might play some game, right? You ever, I thought you might find this interesting. Progressive Policy Institute poll from 2013. What do you think is a bigger safety threat in America, guns or violent video games? Violent video games, 2/3. 19% said not sure. Guns only had 14%. So people see violent video games as more of a threat than guns. I just like my time down. Should video games be banned? Violent video games? Should the government ban these? This is another poll from 2013. I got interested in the subject because there's one of the LaGrange College football players years ago, part of that team that went from losing all the games to winning the conference championship. He was the star wide receiver. He was a big video game player. And when he took this American Experience class, he got very interested in this subject. And he wound up writing a big old paper. I think every paper of his was twice the length. But he did a lot of research on the subject. If you can see this, I don't know if you can notice this, and it's a function of age, but as people get older, when you actually get people who are 55 to 64 or even 65 plus, people who had parents from the 50s, all the way to live through the 50s, wanted video games banned. By the way, when I say violent video games, I think what happens is people think of any video, many video games get classified as, I mean, outside of like maybe Pac-Man, maybe Mario can get away with it, Sonic the Hedgehog. I just thought you'd find that interesting. Younger people, of course, have a very different view. Banned video games, 82% say, of course not. But that's more than half say video games should be banned. Think about that, even if you're not a gamer. Isn't that interesting? Just evidence of a stuffier time in terms of, you know, people blaming things on popular media. Because it couldn't be the family. Okay, myth that we have. The 1950s was America's best decade. Makes sense? How most people do it. Does Kuhn cite any other evidence? She said the economy was great, families stayed together. Did she give any other evidence? Most people say in polls that was our greatest time. She cites a poll. So, yep. 1950s, building the American dream. The America, the Story of Us, very optimistic view of the 1950s. They did point out, you know, racial concerns, social problems. I decided to take a look at that poll that Stephanie Kuhn cited. It's from 1996. Knight Ridder, no, that's different from Knight Rider, all of you TV fans. This isn't somebody talking to a car by a watch. A smart car. The original smart car, by the way. I thought you'd find that funny. Well, you probably don't know. See, Knight Rider was like the car was a computer that talked to the driver and had a sense of humor, and had a British accent, sort of nasally British accent. Smart car. I was like, one of my best times. Yeah, that's why I'm teaching and why I'm not Seinfeld. Anyway, Knight Ridder is a group, they own a lot of newspapers, by the way. It's a press syndicate organization. It's a very extensive poll. Can y'all see it? Do I need to make it bigger? Okay. What do you notice about this poll? '50s, most popular decade. Agree, disagree?
Agreed, but it didn't win the majority.
Oh, you're a step ahead of me. Dang. You ever see those, like they'll show an optical illusion, they'll say, what letter is it? And you're staring at this black geometric shape for hours trying to figure out what letter it is. And what you don't see is the big white E. You ever seen that? Because we're trained to look at letters as black and the background is white. So when they flip it, it looks very different. But yeah, it is the most popular decade in terms of how many people voted for it. But you're right, it's not a majority of people say that. Anything else interesting about this poll? In fact, less than 40% of people think it was the best decade. Anything else? I mean, it gets more votes than any other decade. I grant you that. Anything else interesting? When's the poll?
96.
96, okay. Anything interesting about that?
What generation are they asking?
Oh, this assumes that that you would have to prove that you lived in all those decades. So how old, let's say, what would be a good age of reason? Because if you're like 3 years old in the 1950s, you're probably not getting a lot of the socioeconomic development stats. What would we say be a reasonable age? 15? Like you would have to be 10 years old in 1950? Does that sound fair?
Yeah.
So how old should the age be for people being polled?
About 50.
Okay, so you gotta see 1940 to 1996. So you have to be like 56 or older to be in the poll. I don't think they asked only old people. Again, we have it in our minds that it's the best. There's no proof that we have had to actually have ever lived during that period. How do we know the 50s are the greatest? Word of mouth, okay, you ask some parent, or more likely,
Television.
well, I'm sorry?
Television.
Yeah, TV land, right? Every time you turn on a TV show, everything looks great. Yep, move along, nothing to see here, everything's fine. History Channel special, America the Story Bus, everything looks great, right? So in other words, we hadn't experienced it, we're just looking at TV shows. Who here likes holiday movies?
Somewhat.
Yeah, all right, yay, Kadarius, that's like the highest a hand has gotten today. Hey, it was like your fingertips were exceeding your head. Anybody else like holiday movies? Okay, maybe not. Okay, yeah, I know there's some Hallmark ones going. All right, I've had two, so I can grant this. But how many of you seen the movie Scrooged? Raise your hand if you've seen Scrooged. Nobody seen Scrooged? You have? You remember? Bill Murray's the main character, and it's based on A Christmas Carol, you know, Charles Dickens, although they have it kind of edgier, and it's a, hey, what do you know, TV producer. And he talks about how, you know, so one of the ghosts, the Ghost of Christmas Past is questioning his childhood, and Bill Murray goes, no, 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 I had a great childhood, everything was perfect. And the Ghost of Christmas Past goes, no, it wasn't. He says, I have this great memory. I'm in a field and I'm running across the field, you know, with my outstretched arms toward my sister, you know, or something like that. Do you remember what it really was? Yeah, the Ghost of Christmas Past is this like New York cabbie. He's like, that was the season finale of Little House on the Prairie. All his great childhood, he has this view that all his childhood was perfect. What he did is he watched a lot of good TV shows. His actual, when they actually take him to the past, his life is a dystopia. But he thinks it's perfect because he remembers all the TV shows as being great. Yeah, you gotta watch it. Scrooged. See it once. Kind of edgier, kind of funny. But a lot of times that's where people, oh, 50s were the greatest. How do we know? Back to the Future, TV Land, nowadays YouTube. But there's more. Greatest economic decade, right? That's what the professor said. It's got to be right. Somebody's got a lab coat, tells you to do something, you'll do it, right? Why not? They got a degree. I'm not knocking, I mean, Stephanie Kuntz is great academic, so I'm not trying to take her down a peg because she appears on a lot of TV shows and I don't. No, nothing like that. No bitterness whatsoever. No. But here's something different. I study international political economy, and I'm always playing with economic data. I'm fascinated by economic data. And a lot of times people, oh, things are great. How do you know? Well, wages grew, and businesses exploded, and everything was great. And so I thought, see, this is the whole point of what I'm trying to do with the class. It's not about the 1950s per se, it's about questioning myths. So I thought, let me test it just to see. Because almost everyone I know when I read their stuff, they said 50s was great economically. So even though everyone else said it, remember what a myth is. Model that makes sense. So the people keep repeating it until we just accept it as gospel truth. The fish that you caught gets bigger and bigger and bigger. You ever see that TV show where the guy's describing how he hauled in the great beast and they put it in a tiny little cooler? You want your fish? It's actually really small. Because probably one of the most dangerous things you can say in academia or in everyday life is, I wonder. I wondered if the 1950s were the greatest decade. So, remember, multiple ways to compare it. As compared to what? So I decided to compare the 1950s to a couple other decades. Also, I know a little something about economics. I'm not, you know, I teach about political economy. I'm not an economist. But I know how to look at data. And I noticed that, like a lot of times people say the economy's going great. Well, first off, you got to look at GDP per capita. You all know what that means? Like per person? So you gotta say, you know, which is like the standard living, when you say, what's the GDP per capita? It's 50,000, that means on average everyone makes 50,000 a year. Rather than just looking at the whole economy. You gotta use it in the same dollars, so I used it 1985 dollars. So like if we put everything in 1985 dollars, because you hear these stories, oh, Babe Ruth, he was such a nice guy, he only played for like $3,000 a year. Well, that could be like a lot of money, right? Only 3,000. Well, that's not much now, but that might have been a lot in the 1930s. Especially when minimum wage, or, well, they didn't have minimum wage in the 20s, but like when Babe Ruth was playing in the 1920s, U.S. Steel was paying like 20 cents an hour. U.S. Steel was like one of the biggest companies, so sort of like the industry standard for wages. You can't live on 20 cents an hour, but maybe you could back then. Does that make sense? So you gotta have a common reference for numbers. Does that make sense to y'all somewhat? Also, I use this word real. And what real means is they look at the data, but they kick out inflation. Y'all know what inflation is? You didn't grow up with inflation being a concern. But when I was a kid in the 70s, gas prices in 1978 were 33 cents a gallon. Right now, Jacob was like, whoa, I am filling up the big old pickup. Yeah, pickup. You do? Oh, I can count. You gotta fill that up for 33 cents. Okay, they jumped almost overnight. The following year, just prices spiked, maybe, not even like a year, it was like 2 or 3 months. It jumped up to $1.20. Jacob's still going, hot damn, I'm still filling up the pickup, right? But if you were paying 33 cents and it jumps up to $1.20, that's a bit of a shock. If we put that in today's numbers, what is gas? What's a good deal for gas? If you drove down to Valley, Alabama, you know where gas is cheap. It's about what?
180.
Yeah, oh, wow, okay, 180, here is 210. Let's take an average. You go down to West Point, it's $2. Sound fair? All right. 33 cents to $1.20, $1.25, almost $1.30. What kind of price increase is that? 33 to $1.20. Problem solving, core 1120, starting, it's about what? About 4 times higher. Problem solving, wheels turning. Okay, what would, if gas jumped up to, what would it have to jump up? Yeah, to equal what happened in the 70s with inflation.
Well, at some point, gas was like $5 a gallon.
It would have to be much higher.
So,
What would it be? $8 an hour. You fill it up, pick up for $8? You're carpooling or truck pulling. You're driving over to Walmart and you've got like, you know, 3 or 4 other people in the cab and everyone else in the back, right? It sucks for your gas mileage. But yeah, what it does, inflation can eat up a lot of things. What do you notice about these numbers? When you kick out inflation, when you compare it to a common standard, how good are them 1950s? What?
Not that good.
Yeah. Mediocre. Stumbling along. Nearly flat. How does it compare to the other decades, the 60s, 70s, and 80s?
Not as good.
Yep, not as good. See, Back to the Future, the present is bad, right? But look, in reality, the 1980s were great. In the 1950s, sluggish. Weird how that happens. Maybe Michael J. Fox fixed it by going back in time. Became chairman of the Federal Reserve and does that make sense? Yeah, the 1950s, out of all the decades, was not the greatest. In fact, out of the post-war decades, it's the worst. Because the 1990s are much closer to the 1960s for growth rate. 1990s was an incredible growth period. 2000s were more like the 70s. Yeah, any time after World War II, the 50s were the flattest economic time. How's that possible? Somebody forgot to compare it to a different decade, and somebody else forgot to take inflation out of it. When you take those two things out, hey, I'm getting paid more. Sure, but prices are going up. So are you really getting ahead? Does that make sense to you? By the way, whenever I run these numbers for people like outside, they're like, oh, that can't be right. everything looks good in Leave It to Beaver. Everybody's got a job, right? You know, you saw the America the Story about us. Hey, it's suburbia. Everyone's doing well. We'll talk more about this on Monday. Millennium on Friday, so if you've already attended, you've got an option. You can show up and join us. You can go ahead and take off. Hell, this is not being nice. Wait. You're too polite. Yeah, they had changed they posted the wrong final exam period, but the correct one should be this a week from Thursday at 8 o'clock. Now, we all built our syllabi, and then they forgot to take into account the 10:50 to 11:30 thing, so all of our exams changed. All right. Oh, you did it. You got a what? During that time?
I think it's in the morning, but.
All right, let's take a look. I'll confirm it for everybody. How's that sound? Go ahead, you have any questions? Oh my gosh, did you poll?
Well, yeah, I noticed that, yeah, and,
Go ahead, Lynn.
okay, and I guess I was wondering, with the company,
I should have told you to look this up over here.
should I submit, like,
That's a new thing. This is the first year I've ever had. Sure.
should I submit, like, an outline of each slide of what I would say if I was submitting?
Just send the presentation.
Okay. That's cool. Well, yeah, that's really all.
Hey, if you really wanted to, you could podcast it or something like that, but, I mean, if you wanted that, for like your resume or something.
Okay.
That'll be fine, just like how you use it.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
I was just asking about the final when,
Oh, okay. Yeah, let's see if they've changed it on this.
sure, send it.
Exactly. Yeah, I remember when it came out, I just went with what they had, and then, what happened was the people who were putting together the schedule stayed on the 10:50 and not the 11. So let me get this, and that'll probably help clarify what the biology is as well. So if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. So let's take a look. All right, there's an easy way to figure it out. Well, not easy, but easy. Calendar. Let's go. All right. Am I right? Let's see. This is 8 to 8:30, Monday, Wednesday, Friday class. I was correct. It's Thursday, December 8th.
So what about, my class starts at 1:50.
1:50. It is at 11:30 to 2:30.
It's right after.
Okay.
Okay.
Sound good? All right. Gerard, you have a similar question?
Not my question.
Oh, okay, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, so for the presentation, when I go to, like, write it up,
Mm-hmm.
how should it be formatted? Because if I was presenting it, I would just have like bullet points and I would kind of go off of those. Like if I was presenting it out loud.
Yeah, have it be standalone enough so that we can kind of follow. Because a good presentation is one that you can deliver, but also that the audience can follow even if they don't have your words. So whatever strategy you prefer, some people use notes. You can drop the information in the notes like what you would say. I would accept that. Or you can just have like mine tend to be really crowded. Randall Adams, his tend to be very, very Spartan, but he'll have more slides.
Okay, and then also, my paper, I don't have my second paper. You still have my second paper?
I do. All right, well, let's go over and get, do you have a class right now?
I do. But where do you, I have my class in the CAD.
Yeah, I'm heading right over there.
Okay,
Let's
well,
go,
okay.
and then even if, I didn't want to make you late, so if you want to, you can catch me as soon as it's out.
Okay. You want me to just do that?
Sure.
Okay.
I wonder if that's one that I put in my bin.
And how long should the presentation be, just as long as it would be if I were presenting it, or?